everyone. I'm Christine Tully, President and Executive Writing Coach at Devon Publish and Lead, and welcome to episode 249, Keep Writing Top of Mind. I got the inspiration for this episode because somebody asked me if I think about writing after I'm doing it. And the context of the conversation was that, let's say you have a couple of scholarly writing sessions during the week. They wanted to know if I'm actually thinking about the writing that I want to do in other times during the day. Is it a thing where I'm thinking about writing, so I do more writing? And it was just kind of a question about how, if I'm not doing writing, how do I kind of remember things that I want to work on, but also things about skill and just different ways that I might want to do writing. And it was just a general conversation that for many academics, when they're not doing scholarly writing, they may feel some guilt about not doing any scholarly writing, but they're not necessarily thinking about it all the time. And a larger part of this conversation was that with teaching, for example, many of us will do things to stay on top of, maybe a new pedagogical strategy or a new technology to teach. But with writing, we don't necessarily take the same time to learn new skills or to do things to just kind of keep it an active part of our week in the way that we might do with teaching content. So here are 3 ways for this week that you might think about keeping writing top of mind for you. One of the things you can do is listen to a writing podcast. So obviously you're listening to this one, so you're getting some of that content right away, but there's other ones that you definitely can listen to. 2 that I like to recommend, of course, in addition to ours, is the Researchers Writing podcast. This is one that really looks at science writing, and I think it's a good one for that. So you can check that one out. Also, Well Written, a podcast for graduate and doctoral students. This one is good because it's a podcast just about people that have completed a thesis project or a dissertation. So the idea is talking with people that have already completed it and have lived to tell about it. So I like the interviews. I like the way that it talks about writing in a very interactive way. So one of the things that you will find if you start looking for scholarly writing podcasts is there's not a lot of them out there. There are some. There are some that are geared more for creative writing. So this is something where I feel like we definitely need more content in this area, but there's maybe a handful of them. The other thing that I found is sometimes you can get really good inspiration from podcasts that are about writing that aren't even necessarily for creative writers. They might be more about effective communication. You can look for podcasts in that way. But just adding one of these in your mix for your podcast feed, if you're somebody that normally listens to podcasts, can be a way to just kind of remind you about different things for writing. And I know for me, if I'm listening to a podcast, a lot of times that gives me sort of an action item for the week. So there's another podcast that I listen to all the time that talks about business strategies and stuff and some things that I've already been doing in our company. So I wouldn't think about those otherwise, except for the fact that they pop up in my podcast feed. So it's a good way to just kind of do a low stakes thinking about writing. A lot of times you could just be listening and getting some of the content that way. Another thing to do, and I've mentioned this before, a lot of times when we do our Christmas episode, is to think about reading a book that talks about scholarly writing development. And this goes back to the thing that I said about teaching, that a lot of times we'll put work into strengthening our teaching or doing pedagogical development, but we don't necessarily do the same for our scholarly writing. So I usually try to read at least one book on scholarly writing every year. Traditionally, I do it in the summer, but if you're somebody that has some faculty development funds and you're looking to, purchase a resource, this is kind of a low stakes way to get some reading in on scholarly writing. But also, I would argue a physical book, a lot of times you can, take it with you places. You can have it on hand to pass down to a graduate student. So usually the resources can kind of live on. I put a couple of titles up for you on the screen. One that I recently read was Academic Writing as If Readers Matter by Leonard Cassuto. I really like this because it basically was making an argument for very clear and accessible prose, which a lot of us say we want, but we don't actually do it. And this sort of back-end scholarly writing to think about the reader first at the central. Another one I really like is economical writing. So all these titles will be in the show notes. You can kind of check them out. Economical writing is another great book. This one really talks about just some rules to keep in mind when you're writing to make sure that your sentences aren't too wordy and things like that. You also can check out specific guidelines for scholarly writing for your discipline. So nursing is one of those disciplines that they have a great kind of a great roster of tons of resources about scholarly writing. But there's definitely a lot of books that are set up for scientific writing. For example, if you're going to write your first scientific journal article, there's a book out there called Published, and it basically takes you from, a literature review to doing an experiment to visualizing how you want to do that, and then writing a peer-reviewed article. And also written by Beck Evans and Chris Smith. And we did an interview with Beck a while back that I will link to in the show notes. So all those are great books. And if you just type in scholarly writing into Amazon or academic writing for publication, you can usually come up with some good resources. Finally, I definitely recommend joining an organization focused on writing. So, as you know, the Textbook and Academic Authors Association is our one and only sponsor for this podcast. And so that's an organization that focuses only on scholarly writing. So, when you join it, that's what you're getting. That is how you get all the templates and free resources and webinars and all that. And it keeps writing top of mind because they have monthly events, they have writing retreats, they have all kinds of things to help with that. And so just by joining an organization that's focused on it, that certainly is one way to make sure you stay on top of your writing skill. But your own individual discipline may have an organization that might have something similar. So you might check that out as well. Sometimes organizations will have their own scholarly writing retreat or workshops at the conference for something like that. Finally, another way to keep writing top of mind, I've mentioned it on a couple of episodes, but is our Tuesday Toolbox series. If you want to join doing this, this is a workshop or a weekly email that has a short video on scholarly writing sent every single week. We do 14 weeks in the fall and 14 in the spring. And every week you get a writing or productivity tool, which is a short video with links and things that you can use to support your writing. Hopefully you found these resources helpful and happy writing this week.